Hey team, I just want to apologize in advance that the audio quality on this podcast isn't the best. It starts off a little shaky, but then the bulk of the interview is pretty good. So I just wanted to give you guys a heads up. Amy and I's Skype connection wasn't the best, but there's tons of great info in this episode, so enjoy it. See ya. Welcome to the N1 Fitness Podcast. Today I'm super excited to chat with our guest, Dr. Amy Bender. Amy is the Clinical Program Director of Athlete Services at the Center for Sleep and Human Performance and is also an adjunct professor of kinesiology at the University of Calgary. She has a PhD and Master of Science degrees in experimental psychology from Washington State in sleep EEG, and her current research focuses on the relationship of sleep and recovery on athletic performance in Canadian national team athletes. So thanks for joining us, Amy.
Thanks for having me. I'll try not to slur my words because I just had a filling done about an hour ago.
No, you sound great. You sound great. So for the folks who may not know about your personal story, can you give us a brief background on how you got into studying sleep and then more specifically sleep and its relation to athletic performance?
Sure, yeah. I started off as a sleep technologist at Washington State University at the Sleep and Performance Research Center, and pretty much got that job by luck, I would say, because my aunt was a sleep technologist. She kind of got me interested in sleep and just looking at the physiology of what's going on during sleep. I went to her laboratory. She showed me, the hookup, all the electrodes, all the physiological things they were measuring, and was so interested in it that when I got back, I called every single sleep lab in Spokane and tried to see if I could volunteer. And one person bid on it, and he helped me. I was able to observe overnight. As it turned out, he was on the hiring committee of the Washington State University Sleep Lab director. And so I was connected with Keith, who was helping with training, and then Keith knew Greg Belenke, who is the head of the WSU Sleep Center. So as it turns out, they were looking for a sleep technologist. I got hired on at WSU, worked there for 4 to 5 years, and decided that I really wanted to get my PhD and my master's because I knew it was at that point where I could start designing experiments and really start to answer questions with regard to sleep. And for my after I finished my PhD, I knew I was interested in working with athletes, and the University of Calgary and the Center for Sleep and Human Performance was one of the few labs across the world who were specializing in sleep and athletic performance. I was a former athlete myself, so that was part of my interest working with athletes. I played college basketball, and I was able to do an Ironman after that and do some mountaineering. So, I feel like I'm really lucky to be here working with Canadian national team athletes and athletes across all the different spectrums, personal all the way up to professional, and really helping them optimize their sleep for better performance.
Very cool. So most experts seem to agree that we need somewhere between, say, 7 hours of sleep per night. But do athletes or folks who are fairly active need more sleep? And if so, what is it that's increasing that sleep need, if that's the case?
It's actually a great question, and there's not a lot of scientific evidence or studies done to determine how much sleep an athlete needs. I would say the sleep community, those working with athletes in sleep, generally regard that they do need more sleep than the average person who should be getting between 7 and 9, as you mentioned, because of the physical and the cognitive demands of the sport. Depending on the sport, so if you're more of an endurance athlete, you likely need more sleep to recover from that. If you're more of a power athlete, maybe not as much. So that's kind of the general consensus, is we do think that they need more, and that depends on your level of training and physical activity as to how much more you actually need.
Gotcha. So with marathon or people that are doing long distance sports, is that just like a training volume kind of thing? Is that how we think that it correlates? Like, as opposed to a power athlete who isn't doing as much training volume?
Absolutely. So, yeah, it also depends within where you're at in your training. So, we would think a marathon runner would need more than a power lifter, for example. But within that, if you are a marathon runner and you have a high training load coming up, or you're getting in a lot of miles, kilometers, you're going to need more sleep than if you're on a taper. So, yeah, there's a lot of variability within depending on your training.
Right. That totally makes sense. Now, quote unquote banking sleep, is that possible? And if so, do you have athletes use that tactic leading into the busy part of a season or pre-planned increase in training load and stuff like that? Are you having them front load sleep if possible?
Yes, that is a main strategy that we use here is to try and get athletes to bank sleep, especially leading into an important competition or travel. And the research shows that it is effective. So there's been a few studies where they look at, a person getting their normal amount of sleep and then how they perform after a sleep deprivation or during a sleep deprivation period. And then the same person will then bank sleep a week before the sleep deprivation period, and they perform much better. So some scientists, sleep scientists, disagree. They don't think you can bank sleep, but I would say the majority of us do, and I don't see how you can refute that evidence that you perform better if you get more sleep into a stressful event.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was listening to a podcast with Matthew Walker on it, the Why We Sleep. He wrote Why We Sleep, and he was talking about banking sleep. And I'm not sure if this is exactly what he meant, but the way that I took it was that kind of like if you miss out on sleep, you can't really catch up. Now, I don't know if that is if he's saying also that you can't bank sleep then if you can't front load it. I don't know exactly, but I guess maybe there is a little bit of you know, not everybody agrees on the subject across the sleep world.
Yeah, I tried to actually get clarification on that from him, but I never heard back. Basically, how can you refute this evidence? And I just wanted to see what his take was, but I didn't quite hear back yet. So maybe to be continued.
Oh, okay, cool, cool. Oh, that's exciting. All right. Now, the cognitive decline from inadequate sleep seems to be fairly clear to a lot of people. They just don't feel as sharp, focused, etc. But what are some of the physical impacts on athletic performance or just, day-to-day physical function like reaction time and things like that? If even if somebody's driving a car, for example. So when sleep needs aren't met.
It's really interesting. I think we would think that most, like you mentioned, most of the problem falls within the brain. So there's actually, when you don't get enough sleep, some people think that neurons within the brain are actually falling asleep, and that can cause a lapse in attention. So the research is leaning more towards that way that you don't get a sufficient amount of sleep, neurons are actually sleeping while you appear to be awake with your eyes open. So that can certainly impact your driving performance. You have more lapses of attention, so which is not a good thing when you're driving on the road. Your reaction time is slower, as you mentioned, which is not a good thing for athletes or just the general population. But also, it impacts the physical performance, which is strength. So it's mainly having to do with the brain talking to the body. So the, the brain is more fatigued, and so you aren't able to go as hard or go as long. So your perceived level of exertion is much higher than when you're fully rested, and those are effects of course, on performance.
Okay, great. So folks get nervous before, a big work meeting, just like they do before big sporting events. So how do you manage and mitigate the potential negative impacts of poor sleep when it matters most, leading into, say, competition with national athletes?
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of athletes or high professionals get anxious about, hey, I have this important meeting coming up. It's likely that I'm not going to get good sleep. Is this a problem? And for us, we tell the athletes, if you're getting good sleep leading into that, it's not going to affect you as much. So with similar to the banking sleep. So can you get more sleep? Can you get better sleep leading into that important competition so that if you do have a poor night's sleep, it's not going to impact you? And so we try confidence by saying that, don't be so alarmed if you don't get a good night's sleep. You're gonna do fine. You're getting this good sleep leading in. And I think also napping can be a useful strategy as well when we're talking about banking sleep. It's not necessarily just about nighttime sleep, but it could be about getting a nap in there, maybe a longer nap, or if you don't nap, adding in a 20-minute nap.
Leads me into my next question perfectly. I love your stuff on napping, and you've thrown some infographics and stuff like that up on Twitter regarding nap lengths, timing for specific goals, and stuff like that. So, can you share some of your thoughts on napping with us? And if folks were going to implement napping, if they wanted to, banking sleep, or just playing a bit of catch up, what should they be focusing on?
Napping is great. I mean, what we see in our Canadian national team athletes is about a third fairly regularly. They're good nappers. A third don't nap at all, so they could definitely be taking advantage. And then a third are more of maybe one time a week that they're napping. So I think napping is a really big strategy that athletes and professionals can take advantage of. And for us, we would recommend a shorter nap so that you're not getting into the deeper stages of sleep where you wake up feeling groggy, not knowing where you are. So a nap, under 30 minutes is ideal, and we would recommend that for the majority of naps across the week, with maybe a longer nap of about 90 minutes. Try and get that full sleep cycle in maybe one or two times per week. So you get all the stages of sleep, you get the non-REM sleep, you get REM sleep as well. For the shorter nap, we would recommend setting an alarm, so about 10 minutes beyond the duration that you want to nap for. And that way, hopefully you'll wake up before that alarm goes off and you waking up feeling refreshed. And so definitely if you wake up before, get up, don't wait for your alarm, and that'll make you feel more alert. For the longer nap, we actually wouldn't recommend an alarm because we want you to wake up naturally after a completed sleep cycle. So you may have to set an emergency alarm, maybe a 2-hour emergency alarm, but then try and wake up naturally after you've completed the sleep cycle would be some of our advice for napping. As far as techniques to nap, I mean, that's a big one too. A lot of people don't really know how to nap. So it would be similar to what you would do at night. You want a bit of a routine. So potentially writing a to-do list before your nap, because a lot of people, it's during the day, they're stressed out, they have all this stuff on their mind. So can you write a little to-do list so that when you wake, it offloads your thoughts so that when you wake up, you can, get going on that list is really helpful. But also potentially doing some breathing exercises to help you fall asleep. The 4-7-8 breathing technique is a good one. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
I'm not, no.
But okay. So it's you breathe in for 4 seconds, and then you hold your breath for 7, and then you breathe out for 8. So breathe in 4, hold your breath 7, breathe out 8 seconds. And what that does is it activates the parasympathetic nervous system, you don't really have to get hung up on the numbers. It's more about, can you breathe out longer than you breathe in, and that will activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So having techniques like that is really helpful for anyone looking to try and take advantage of napping. I would say that for our swimmers, let's say, who start training at 5:30 in the morning, which is ridiculous to begin with, but
Totally.
sometimes that's the way it goes. For those type of athletes, it would be more of a longer nap every single day to make up for the lack of nighttime sleep.
Now, are we seeing an equivalent benefit of, say, somebody getting 6 hours of sleep at night, like that swimmer, waking up at 5:30 and then getting, say, a 90-minute nap during the day, hitting their, I don't know, 7.5 hours? Are they getting the same benefit out of that cumulative 7.5 hours as opposed to sleeping 7.5 through the night and then maybe not napping during the day?
It's funny you asked that. I actually, during my graduate school work, I worked on a study that they were trying to test whether or not split sleep is the equivalent. So they had participants come in. I don't remember the exact details, but they had participants come in for a 10-hour nighttime opportunity, and then they switched them to a split sleep schedule where it was 5 hours and 5 hours during the day, which I mean is a little unrealistic. But they found that the amount of sleep was very similar between the two groups, and the performance was similar as well, but it was more about subjective alertness. So for the group that was sleeping that huge chunk during the day, they didn't quite feel as alert as the group sleeping that big chunk at night. So they weren't a huge fan of the schedule. I think if you have some things limiting you, so if you're a night shift worker or if you do have early morning training, um, it can be done by extending that sleep during the day.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And then as far as going back to the napping situation, if there's an athlete or somebody you're working with saying, I can't ever fall asleep during the day, like I can't nap, are you still recommending that they go lay down, maybe do some breathing, and even if they don't fall asleep, are they getting some benefit out of that, just like, 20, 30 minutes of chilling out and closing their eyes?
That's a great point. I actually was working with a college hockey goalie yesterday, and he told me, he said, I can't nap. And it was interesting because it was more of a superstitious thing for him. So he felt like when he naps before a game, he does worse. And so he was really, really anti napping in this individual I was working with. But absolutely, I told them, even if you don't fall asleep, you're reducing your level of arousal and it's going to be beneficial for you. And the research finds that neurons turn off even if you're laying there and not falling. And obviously, it's not as if you are taking a nap and falling asleep, but it will activate the parasympathetic nervous system and get you more relaxed. And so, absolutely, even if you don't enjoy napping, just taking that time to shut down, it will be better for you.
Okay, cool. And then if somebody is hypothetically falling asleep, are there some certain lengths of naps that maybe I've heard some things around, maybe 20-minute naps boost creativity and 30-minute or 40-minute naps boost, mental clarity and focus. Do we know anything about nap times and then the specific benefits, or is it all just sort of sleep as much as you can or as little as you can, either 20 to 30 minutes or a complete sleep cycle of 90 minutes?
I think the data out there on it's tough because what stage of sleep you're getting into, it's not based on time every single day. So what I mean by that is if I pull an all-nighter, I'm going to get into deep sleep much quicker than if I'm getting my normal amount of sleep. And if I drink caffeine, obviously it's going to impact your sleep architecture. And so a lot of your prior sleep wake history will determine when you will get into a specific stage of sleep. But there's not a magic number, or, you can't control how your sleep architecture progresses across a nap. So I think, and time of day as well. So, if you nap more in the morning, you may get into REM sleep later. And so it's to actually prescribe a duration of nap and how that will be associated with creativity, because your brain and your body does what it wants to do depending on your prior sleep-wake history and the time of day.
Yeah, that makes sense too. And I guess if someone was to nap closer in the morning and they get some more REM, that REM sleep is probably going to be associated with more creativity because maybe they dreamt a little bit and it was a little bit looser and things like that. So that's a really interesting point. Now, I have seen something around creatine and it possibly being a minor stimulant. And something that I've noticed anecdotally is if I take creatine too close to a time where I'm trying to nap, I actually find it harder to get to sleep. Do you know anything about creatine being a minor stimulant and falling asleep?
I've heard that a lot, actually. I don't know if there's any scientific evidence of that, but definitely anecdotally, I hear that a lot in athletes, that they don't want to take it too close to bedtime at night, but then also it can impact your nap. It's important to keep that in mind if you're using it, and the timing of that, to see if it's affecting you. So you may want to shift the time of your creatine intake depending on when you're napping or when you're going to bed at night.
Okay, cool. And then as we sort of start to wrap up here, Amy, if someone came to you and, you're like, they're wanting you to bang out maybe your 3 to 5 favorite take-home points to just get better sleep in general, what are those sort of bullet points or just key points when someone's like, give me the goods? What are you telling that person?
Well, I think everyone should try and think of sleep in terms of three main factors. So it's not just about quantity of sleep, but the quality and the timing. So if we just look at quantity of sleep, so we want to make sure that you're getting between 7 and 9 hours, potentially more if you're an adolescent, it'd be more like 8 to 10, and then potentially more than that 7 to 9 if you're an endurance runner or your training load is very high. So adjust that quantity based on your training load, your age, and your overall sport. Also incorporating the napping part of quantity as well. So if you don't normally nap, can you maybe bump that up to 2 or 3 times per week, where you could get to 5 times, which is what we would recommend. And as I mentioned, it doesn't have to be a long chunk of time. It could even be 10 minutes if you can. So napping or quantity is nighttime sleep as well as napping sleep. But then also banking sleep is a huge thing, which we already talked about, which relates to quantity. Can you get more sleep leading into that important event? We didn't talk a lot about quality, but definitely is important. So being able to shut down the room, start dimming the lights, doing relaxing activities the hour before bedtime is really important, because it starts to prepare your mind and your body for sleep, so you're going to have much better quality sleep than if you were to, do a bunch of work right before. So that's important as well. And caffeine is a big one. So for me, I try and drink decaf coffee I might have a green tea or something in the early afternoon, but people want to watch out for the timing of their caffeine intake. And I know in the athlete community, people are just down in the caffeine and don't think about how that can impact their recovery. So being aware of caffeine is a big one, and I think there's some new research showing it depends on your genotype as to how you metabolize the caffeine. So if you are a fast metabolizer, it is really good for your performance. But if you're more of that slow metabolizer, it can actually impair your performance. So actually knowing how you metabolize caffeine is a good thing in order to determine how you're going to use it. And then timing. So timing of sleep, trying to sleep in line with your chronotype. So chronotype, are you more of that night owl or are you more of that early bird? Sleep in line with that if you can, because if you're more of that night, your melatonin release is going to be much later, and which will determine the quality of your sleep. So if you can, trying to time that sleep with your chronotype is very helpful. And then also, I would say being consistent with the sleep schedule if you can, trying not to alter it by an hour. So if you normally go to bed at 11 p.m. and you wake up at 7, try and keep within range across the entire week because that consistency helps our brain and our body know when we should be asleep.
Right. Those are great tips for people to take home. Now, Amy, if folks want to learn more about you and your work, and maybe even if you do consults with folks that aren't athletes and things like that, where can folks find out more about you and the work you're doing?
Absolutely. So I'm connected with Center for Sleep and Human Performance, so they can go to the website, check us out there. I'm also pretty active on Twitter, so I'm always posting about new research that comes out and how we interpret it. So people can connect with me at Sleep for Sport, the number 4, on Twitter or Instagram too.
Awesome. I'll link to all that stuff in the show notes, and thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I'll catch you guys on the next episode.